What's going on? Jake here with Uncommon EDC, and today we're going to be taking a look at the QSP Grebe. I got this one in a recent Going Gear box, and this version features a Tanto style blade with JG10 scales. There are a ton of different configurations available though, and this is a fairly affordable model. So depending on the configuration you go with, there is slight variance in the pricing, but you have a lot of different scale options to choose from, even a couple of different blade shapes to choose from. So the version you see in front of you, you can pick up for around $67. And as always, I'll make sure to leave a link to where you can find it down in the description of the video. Now, the Grebe features a button lock for our locking mechanism, and it's incredibly well executed. So out of the box, there was maybe the slightest bit of button stick, very, very minimal, but that's pretty much non-existent at this point after a very minimal break-in period. And so really impressive, especially on a knife at this price point, just a really well executed button lock, which is kind of something that has proven to be a little bit difficult to do for some of the budget brands. And so they definitely have that down very, very nicely. Also has a few different deployment methods here alongside that button lock, which you can use the button lock as a deployment method, of course. Not my preferred deployment method, but it definitely works, does its job if that's your preference. But you do have a flipper tab as well, which feels like the main deployment method. And I say that because of all the deployment methods, that feels like the most dialed in. So you get this super snappy action, incredibly smooth, and the detent feels just about perfect for it. And so nothing I'd really change there in terms of the action on that flipper tab, plenty of access to it as well. Just works really, really well. We also have the dual thumb studs here, so left or right hand friendly, or thumb and middle finger friendly, depending on how you look at that. But that also has a super snappy action. In fact, it might even be a little bit more snappy than the flipper tab. And so the reason for that is the detent feels a lot heavier with our thumb studs. You have to kind of break past that detent before it starts moving. So putting a little bit more force to break the detent means that that action feels a lot snappier. On the other hand, it does feel a little bit too heavy for me. And that's probably something to do with how much access do you have to the thumb stud, its placement in relation to the handle and in relation to the pivot. But it feels a lot heavier than the detent on our flipper tab, even though obviously they're kind of exactly the same. And so for me, what that means is I'm not really able to generate enough force with my middle finger to middle finger flick this knife. And so it's a little bit of a bummer because that's my preferred method of opening a knife. I am pretty proficient with it, so that was pretty surprising to see. Now, I'm certain that if I adjusted this pivot, I could loosen that up a little bit to the point where I can middle finger flick this, but that would come at the cost of the flipper tab, where maybe you get a little bit of a lazy flipper tab if you loosen that up too much and kind of destroy that action. So I didn't really want to mess with it since this is kind of how it's dialed out of the box. I kind of wanted to show it as is. I may toy with that a little bit to see if I'm able to get it to the point where I can middle finger flick it without taking too much away from that flipper tab. But overall, that's kind of my only complaint with the action. Overall, extremely smooth, snappy action. So pretty solid and plenty of different options to choose from. So losing one is not the end of the world. Now, in terms of sizing, a really good EDC size knife at 7.375 inches. We get 4¼ inches in the handle. Again, JG10 on this version, but plenty of options to choose from. There are some steel liners under here with some speed holes drilled into them for weight savings. And with the JG10, especially if you hold it up to the light, you can kind of see those holes, which is kind of a cool effect. It does save a little bit of weight, but this is still a relatively heavy knife at 3.8 ounces, what I weighed it in. I think they listed it at 4.2, but I came in a lot lighter at 3.8 ounces on my scale, so not too heavy, but a little bit on the heavier side even with those speed holes. The handle itself, that 4¼ inches, is taken up with the flipper tab, so it ends up being a little bit less than 4 inches of usable space, maybe 3.85, 3.9 inches or so, but still plenty of real estate for that full 4-finger grip. The ergos on here are solid. I'd say pretty average overall. The reason I say that is it's not particularly uncomfortable in any positioning here, but I'm aware of the pocket clip. I can definitely feel it behind my hands. You can see that does stick up a little bit high, but for whatever reason, I feel that a little bit behind my knuckles. Not the end of the world, but it also feels kind of blocky, which again, isn't uncomfortable, but just feels a little bit off. And so you notice that it feels blocky, and so that does take away from the ergos a little bit. Part of that is it's kind of on the thicker side, a little bit over, just a hair over a ½ inch in thickness. That's not including the pocket clip, but that's not the thickest knife overall. But Combine that with the contouring, which is very minimal, enough where it's not scratchy, it doesn't catch you or anything, so you don't have the sharp edge at all, but that's really it. It still leaves it kind of blocky overall, and so you feel that in the hand for sure. The jimping on here is very solid, nice placement on it. It's grabby without being over aggressive. I wouldn't mind it being a little bit more aggressive, but I like an aggressive jimping. But overall, this is a solid jimping. It does its job, it grabs on. It's not just there for looks like some of those kind of super ultra minimal jimpings that don't go very deep. So pretty happy with that as well. We get 3 1/4 inches on our Tanto style blade. Again, there are other blade shapes available. Not sure how many. I know I saw at least one. Again, I got this through a Going Gear box, so it's not like I was shopping for these. But 3 1/4 inches, 14C28N on our blade steel. And so that's a really nice steel at this price point. I'm definitely happy with 14C28N on this knife. We have the small sharpening choil here, not taking up a lot of our edge. You still end up with 3.125 inches on our cutting edge. And then our thumb stud is tucked nicely in line with our sharpening choil, tucked into the scales themselves, so mostly out of the way. You're not going to get caught up on that thumb stud too much when you're making longer cuts or anything like that. Nice blade shape. I don't get a lot of Tanto knives, so I always enjoy them when I do. I think it's kind of a cool looking one. It's just not aesthetically my favorite style of blade, and so don't pick them up too often, so nice to get them every once in a while for sure. That pocket clip, although I do feel it a little bit, it is just your standard bent steel pocket clip. It works well enough, and it's ultra deep carry. You can see that extends past the handle itself, so that entire handle should disappear into your pocket. It is also reversible, and they do send a plug, which is again another nice thing to see on a budget knife. They're including that plug so you don't have that awkward open space, and it's still lefty friendly. The only thing that's not fully ambidextrous here is our button lock, which I know most lefties have adapted to be able to use pretty efficiently as well, even when it's set up for right hand carry. But our thumb studs, our flipper tab, our pocket clip, everything else is very ambidextrous friendly here. We do have that lanyard slot in the back if you want a little bit more to grab onto. If your hands are just a little bit larger than mine, that may come in handy. Or if you just want to add some decor with a paracord and bead there on the back, but that's definitely an option as well. Overall, I think a great little knife. Like I said, it's not my favorite in terms of ergos. I like the look of it. JG10, I used to be more into it. I feel like I've kind of grown out of the JG10 stage. Feels a little bit dated at this point, but still a solid option. It looks great and is a good candidate for dye if you wanted to dye them. So that's an option there as well. The branding on here is pretty minimal. You can see nothing really here on the back or front of that blade, but you do have the QSP branding on our pivot, which I don't mind it on the pivot. I think it's a good place for it. It's out of the way and kind of a unique look to it. So you get the logo there on the pivot, but overall very minimal in terms of the branding. Let me know what you think of this one though down in the comments below. As usual, if you enjoyed the video, consider liking, commenting, subscribing, or checking out some of my other content. And I hope you have a great one. Take care.